Forget pyramids and mummies. The real shock of ancient Egypt isn't they hidden in tombs, it's carved on their temple walls for everyone to see. For over 3,000 years, Egyptian society was built on a view of creation and fertility so bold that it still surprises us today. Their most sacred creation story didn't begin with a spoken word from a god, but with an act of cosmic self-generation. Pharaohs, seen as living gods, were expected to marry their sisters to preserve a pure bloodline. And their great public festivals weren't quiet religious events but lively celebrations of fertility, led by priests of the ever-energized fertility god. What makes this astonishing is that these weren't fringe ideas. This was mainstream Egyptian religion and daily life for thousands of years. While other civilizations were teaching modesty, the Egyptians were publicly honoring fertility. They didn't even have a word for virginity. Women had freedoms that would vanish for centuries afterward, and their knowledge of the body and birth control was ahead of European doctors until the 1800s. So prepare yourself, we're about to uncover how one of the greatest civilizations in history put creation at the very center of life, and why modern society may have misunderstood their wisdom. Now, let's begin with the creation story unlike any you've ever heard. Forget Adam and Eve. Forget the Big Bang. Ancient Egyptians believed the universe began through divine self-creation. And this wasn't some hidden myth. It was the official story, carved into temples, recited in festivals, and taught for generations. The god Adam, alone in the dark waters of chaos, had no companion. So, through his own divine act, he generated existence. From this came the first gods, the first people, and eventually, a whole civilization built on the idea that life itself was sacred creation. What's fascinating is that they didn't see this as crude or shameful, it was considered the holiest act of all. The Heliopolitan creation myth, written in pyramid texts around 2400 BCE, clearly describes Adam as he who created himself, who brought himself into being. From him came Shu, the god of air, and Tefnut, goddess of moisture. And this wasn't symbolic language. The Egyptians had exact words for self-generation, which appear in their sacred writings. The Kafan texts of the Middle Kingdom are even more direct, describing Atum's first creative act in great detail. This was considered so sacred that the title God's hand became one of the highest honors for women in Egypt. Queens and priestesses proudly carried this title, representing the divine creative force. Even Queen Hatshepsut, one of the greatest female pharaohs, claimed it and had it carved into her temple. Imagine if modern religious leaders held titles directly tied to creation stories. That's how accepted this was in Egypt. Temple walls across the land openly displayed this story. At Karnak, carvings show Atum's self-creation. At Dendera, an entire chapel was dedicated to the first time, the sacred moment of creation. These weren't secret symbols, they were at the center of worship. Modern guides often avoid explaining them, but the ancient Egyptians wanted everyone to know exactly how the world began. These beliefs shaped Egyptian life for over 3,000 years. If the supreme god had created existence through self-generation, then fertility and creativity were divine acts, not things to be hidden. The Nile's yearly flood, which gave life to the desert, was seen as a continuation of Atum's power. Priests even performed rituals echoing Atum's act to ensure the floods arrived on time. In 2007, a rediscovered papyrus revealed detailed instructions for such rituals, proving this was practiced religion, not just myth. Why did they believe this? Because they observed nature closely. Life came from creation. Flood waters brought crops. The desert bloomed after rain. To them, creation and fertility were the natural foundation of life. Unlike Mesopotamian myths of violent battles, or the Hebrew belief in divine speech, Egypt went directly to the biological source, generation. This worldview transformed Egyptian society. Women weren't treated as passive vessels, but as active forces of creation, symbolic of divine power. Medicine reflected this too. The Kahan Gynecological Papyrus, 1800 BCE, shows deep understanding of reproduction, inspired by their creation beliefs. They even developed early fertility treatments. Later translators, embarrassed by these explicit writings, often skipped or softened them. Only in the 1960s did true translations reveal what the Egyptians had really believed. Imagine going to church or school today and being told the universe began with divine self-generation. Most would be shocked. But to the Egyptians, it was sacred truth. While we had such topics, they carved them on their temple walls. And speaking of fertility, one god in particular brought this belief into full public display, Min, the great fertility god. If you thought Atum's story was surprising, wait until you hear about Min's festivals. Min wasn't a minor figure, he was one of Egypt's oldest and most powerful gods, worshipped for over 6,000 years. His celebrations were massive, combining religious ritual with open fertility displays. Imagine Mardi Gras, but sacred. Priests carried statues of Min, while lettuce, seen as a symbol of fertility because of its milky sap, was offered in abundance. Foreigners were shocked by the openness, but for Egyptians, this was serious religion, believed to guarantee the Nile's flood and the fertility of the land. Min's image left no doubt, he was always shown as the god of creation, painted black like the fertile Nile Sol, and often carved on colossal statues. The famous Min statue at Coptos, discovered in 1894, was so explicit that Victorian archaeologists tried to alter it, but thankfully failed. Min's harvest festival was led by the pharaoh himself, carrying the goat statue through cheering crowds, while women danced and performed rituals to honor him. This wasn't hidden, it was central to Egyptian life, worship, and survival. The grand procession always ended at special chapels of Min, where sacred rituals were performed. The Greek historian Herodotus, who visited Egypt in 450 BCE, was so astonished by the worship of Min that he admitted, "What I witnessed in the temples of this god, I can hardly describe, though I know what my eyes saw was true." Roman writers felt the same. Plutarch wrote that women honored statues of Min in ways that would embarrass even Jupiter himself. Yet to Egyptians, these weren't improper acts. They were acts of devotion. Women who wanted children would approach Min's images with prayers and rituals, believing this showed their deepest faith. Archaeology has proven these accounts correct. In 1998, researchers at Luxor Temple uncovered a sealed chamber filled with dozens of small Min figurines, all worn from ritual use. Traces of ancient oils and offerings were found on them, proving they were used in ceremonies. The excavation leader explained that it felt like finding a secret ritual chamber hidden in plain sight. What made it more remarkable was that these statues came from different time periods, proving the practice lasted thousands of years. But Min wasn't confined to temples, he was part of every Egyptian household. Families kept small Min shrines in private rooms. Amulets of the god were worn as jewelry, his symbols proudly displayed. Even children wore Min charms for protection. Imagine giving a child a fertility symbol today, it would cause controversy. Yet in Egypt, it was normal. The Cairo Museum now houses over 10,000 Min amulets, and that's just what has survived the centuries. For foreign visitors, Min's worship was shocking. When Napoleon's troops reached Egypt in 1798, French soldiers reported seeing fertility festivals in villages that left them speechless. One officer wrote, "The people parade fertility symbols through the streets with such excitement that our men are stunned by their openness." Victorian travelers from Britain were so disturbed that they campaigned to hide Min's statues from public display. Many ended up locked in museum basements, where some still remain today. Modern archaeology continues to reveal Min's importance. In 2019, a massive brewery was discovered near Abydos, covered in Min symbols. Every storage jar carried his image. Analysis revealed the beer was brewed with herbs known to increase vitality. This wasn't just symbolic, it was practical. The brewery could produce over 22,000 liters at once, showing that Min's festivals were huge events for entire communities. The beer itself was part of the fertility celebration. Min's influence stretched across every part of Egyptian culture. His symbol became the hieroglyph for male strength. The word for fertility used is sacred lettuce, a plant believed to hold life-giving power. Even Egyptian architecture echoed his worship, columns were built to represent upright power, and doorways symbolized passages into new life. The famous obelisks, now scattered in major cities around the world, were originally monuments to Mean's regenerative force, though most tour guides avoid mentioning it. The reason Mean's worship was so central was simple: Egypt's survival depended on fertility. They needed fertile fields and fertile families. Mean represented both. His festivals aligned with planting and harvest seasons, making them not just religious ceremonies but practical rituals to ensure survival. Temple records even note that birth rates spiked 9 months after major Mean celebrations. To Egyptians, the gods truly delivered on their promises, through natural means. In today's world, fertility symbols would be considered too explicit, removed for community guidelines. But in ancient Egypt, such images were celebrated openly in the streets. They understood something modern society often forgets: fertility and reproduction are the foundation of civilization itself. And if you think this public worship of fertility was extreme, wait until you learn what the royals did to keep their bloodline pure. By pure, I mean practices that would be completely taboo today. Because when your gods create the universe, and your fertility deity is honored everywhere, marrying within the family starts to seem like divine duty. This is where Egyptian traditions moved from unusual to truly shocking by modern standards. We sometimes think European royals marrying cousins was strange. Egyptians went further. Pharaohs often married their sisters, and in some cases, even their daughters. This wasn't scandalous or hidden, it was official policy, considered essential to kingship for over 3,000 years. Take Tutankhamun, for example. In 2010, genetic tests confirmed what researchers long suspected: his parents were full siblings. His grandparents on both sides were the same people. The young pharaoh suffered from serious health problems, clubfoot, scoliosis, and other deformities, that left him walking with a cane by age 19. These weren't just bad luck, they were the result of generations of close intermarriage. But Tutankhamun was far from the only case. Amenhotep III married his daughter Sitamun, who not only became his wife but also bore some of his children. His son, Akhenaten, married multiple daughters, one of whom later became both wife and sister to Tutankhamun. This wasn't a secret. Royal inscriptions proudly proclaimed such unions. Temples bore titles like King's sister, King's wife carved in stone. One still even reads, His Majesty's heart was filled with love for his sister, and he made her his great royal wife. Imagine modern rulers declaring marriage to their siblings, it would cause worldwide outrage. But for Egyptians, it was celebrated as divine. The Ptolemies, Cleopatra's dynasty, continued this tradition for 300 years. Cleopatra herself married 2 brothers. By then, the family tree was so entangled that genetic disorders became increasingly common. Studies of their remains show shorter lifespans, fertility problems, and higher birth complications that eventually contributed to the dynasty's decline. The reason behind it all was religion. Egyptians modeled their royal marriages on the myth of Isis and Osiris, siblings who loved each other so deeply that even death couldn't separate them. Isis reassembled Osiris' body and conceived their son Horus, the god who ruled after them. This myth became the example pharaohs followed, believing their marriages echoed divine creation. Archaeological finds confirm how normalized this was. Marriage contracts between royal siblings exist, written in the same legal language as ordinary marriages. A papyrus from the Ptolemaic period discusses dowry terms between a brother and sister as casually as any prenup today. Temple carvings even show royal sibling couples in loving poses, proudly labeled as both brother and spouse. The Edwin Smith Papyrus contains medical notes specifically addressing conditions linked to royal intermarriage. Egyptians were aware of the biological risks, yet they accepted them as a necessary cost to preserve the sacred bloodline. Foreign rulers often struggled to understand these customs. The Amarna letters, diplomatic records from the 14th century BCE, reveal repeated objections. In one case, a Babylonian king protested, "You ask for my daughter's hand while you yourself are married to your own kin. Such things are not done among civilized peoples." The Egyptians replied with calm dismissal, "You would not understand. It is a matter of the divine." This cultural clash made diplomacy complicated. Foreign princesses, when sent to Egypt, discovered they were expected to share their new husbands with the pharaoh's sisters. The consequences of such unions were severe. Tutankhamun's two stillborn daughters, born from his sister wife, showed extreme genetic deformities that made survival impossible. Yet these infants were carefully mummified with the same reverence as healthy royals, because Egyptians believed they would be reborn whole in the afterlife. To them, the spiritual purity of the bloodline outweighed the physical costs. Beyond religion, sibling marriage served political goals. It kept power, wealth, and succession tightly controlled within the royal family. By marrying his sisters and daughters, a pharaoh eliminated rivals and prevented foreign influence. Some elite non-royal families even began copying the practice, though not as extensively as the royals. Studies of later period mummies reveal higher rates of close relative marriages among the wealthy, showing how the royal example spread. For centuries, Egyptologists resisted acknowledging how deep this practice ran. Many early scholars tried to claim the term sister in inscriptions was symbolic, meaning beloved, not literal. But as genetic testing advanced, the truth became undeniable. When texts said a king married his sister, they meant his actual biological sister. The evidence is now overwhelming, ignoring it would be like denying basic science. Still, museums often soften the truth, using phrases like consolidated royal bloodlines rather than plainly stating that pharaohs married their own siblings. We may worry today about distant cousin marriages, but Egyptian royals regularly married full brothers and sisters, and called it divine duty. Compared to that, modern family dynamics feel tame. And as shocking as this was, it was only one part of Egyptian life. Everyday people also had practices that might surprise you even more, especially when it came to birth control. It is where it gets unusual. While royal marriages raised eyebrows, ordinary Egyptians developed some of the earliest contraceptives in history, using methods that sound bizarre today. Imagine visiting your doctor and being prescribed a mixture of crocodile dung, honey, and sodium carbonate for intimate use. This wasn't a fringe remedy. It was official medical advice, written in papyri by trained physicians. And it is the surprising part, some of it actually worked. Egyptians were so sexually active and practical about reproduction that they created the world's first documented contraceptive system. They experimented with barrier methods, chemical mixtures, and even early abortion techniques. Virginity wasn't a concept, they didn't even have a word for it. Premarital intimacy was accepted, and multiple partners didn't shame. While many ancient cultures were still organizing basic farming, Egyptians were compiling detailed medical guides on women's health. The Kahan Gynecological Papyrus, written around 1800 BCE, reads like a health manual. One recipe prescribed crocodile dung mixed with fermented dough. Another recommended honey with acacia gum and dates. A third suggested lint soaked in acacia juice. Modern scientists discovered these were not random choices. Crocodile dung is alkaline, creating a hostile environment for sperm. Acacia gum produces lactic acid, a natural spermicide still used today. Honey acted as a physical barrier while also fighting bacteria. These mixtures were surprisingly effective for their time. The Ebers Papyrus, 1550 BCE, offered even more detail. It described a pessary made from honey and sodium carbonate, complete with measurements and timing. Another mixture of acacia, dates, and honey was applied on a wool pad. Remarkably, the papyrus included notes about effectiveness, marking some methods as proven and others as still being observed. In other words, Egyptians were running clinical trials 3,500 years before modern medicine. They also understood fertility cycles. The Berlin Papyrus described counting days after menstruation to track fertile periods. While not precise, it showed a surprisingly advanced grasp of reproductive biology for the Bronze Age. They even developed pregnancy tests. Women would urinate on bags of wheat and barley. If the wheat sprouted, it predicted a boy. If barley sprouted, a girl. If neither sprouted, the woman was not pregnant. Modern experiments confirmed this test worked about 70% of the time because pregnancy hormones in urine stimulate seed growth. Archaeological finds back this up. At Deir el-Medina, the village of royal tomb builders, excavations uncovered contraceptive tools, including bronze instruments for removing pessaries, ceramic jars containing residue of contraceptive mixtures, and even a special examination chair designed for multiple medical uses. These weren't luxuries for the elite. Tomb builders were middle class. If they had access, contraception must have been widely practiced. But perhaps the most revolutionary aspect of Egyptian life was women's freedom. With no concept of virginity, women weren't treated as property transferred between fathers and husbands. Marriage contracts show women could own land, initiate divorce, and demand alimony. The instructions of Ptahhotep even advised men to care for their wives, satisfaction in marriage. Compare this to Greece, where women were confined indoors, or Rome, where adultery could mean death. Divorce records reveal the casual, practical nature of Egyptian relationships. One papyrus from the 12nd century BCE states simply, "If you take another woman to your bed, I shall leave and take my property." Another lists incompatibility as the sole reason for separation. Women could divorce for any reason, and society accepted it. Try finding that in other ancient laws. The Turin Papyrus, often called the world's first educational text on intimacy, was not scandalous at all. It was practical learning material. Dating back to 1150 BC, it showed different positions with written instructions. The key detail? Each position included contraceptive advice. This was not hidden or shameful, it was open guidance for married couples. Each survival proves it was not considered offensive or worth destroying. Even professional companionship was organized and protected. The word harimo referred to temple companions who served fertility gods, but secular workers existed too, and they had legal rights. Surviving contracts show workers suing clients for unpaid services. One papyrus even records a woman winning property rights against a dishonest client. They had stronger protection than workers in many countries today. Egyptian medical knowledge of reproduction was advanced. They knew both men and women contributed to conception, unlike other cultures that thought women were just carriers of male seed. The Kahan Papyrus describes examining the cervix to test fertility. They linked menstruation to pregnancy. They even tried fertility treatments, like fumigating the womb with incense. The wide acceptance of contraception shows their practical mindset. In a narrow Nile valley that depended on floods, overpopulation meant disaster during bad years. Controlling births wasn't only personal, it was social duty. Temple writings praised women who knew when to open and close their wombs. Family planning was seen as religious duty, not rebellion against nature. Meanwhile, in 2024 people still argue about birth control. Egyptians, 4,000 years ago, were already using crocodile dropping prescriptions. They gave women more personal freedom than some societies allow today. And if their love lives in this world were free, their ideas about the afterlife were even bolder. For Egyptians, death didn't end pleasure, it was just the beginning. Preparing the body for eternal vitality was their top priority. Unlike religions promising peace or clouds and harps, Egyptians promised endless youth and enjoyment. They mummified bodies with special techniques to ensure vitality forever. Tutankhamun's body shows this, so does Ramesses II, and even common papyrus mummies from later periods. This wasn't vandalism but standard mummification. The Book of the Dead explains why, spells for eternal strength, beauty, and youth. Their paradise wasn't about quiet rest, it was eternal vigor with anyone you desire. Grave goods prove how serious they were. Nefertari's tomb had cosmetics and pleasure items. Tutankhamun's tomb had oils and ointments labeled for eternal vitality. Even poor burials had amulets ensuring joy in the afterlife. The Turin Papyrus, often misunderstood as art, was actually a guide for pleasures in eternity. Some positions shown were impossible in life, but explained as achievable in the afterlife where the body knows no limits. Archaeology supports this, like a 2018 tomb in Saqqara showing a mid-level official enjoying eternal pleasures with partners, human and divine. The cost of such tomb art showed how important eternal vitality was, even for the middle class. Children's burials also included fertility amulets, proving they believed kids would grow into strong adults in paradise. No one remained a child forever in the afterlife. Some texts even describe all people becoming like gods in the field of reeds, where no union was forbidden. The afterlife was seen as total freedom. Egyptians didn't fear death, they planned for it as the ultimate transformation. Yet despite their openness, they had one strict taboo. A rule so strong it created a formal system, the 3-day waiting period. When high-status people died, families kept bodies at home for 3 days before embalming. Not for mourning, but to let natural decay protect them from abuse. Yes, you heard right. Fear of violation of corpses was real. Herodotus wrote about this in 440 BCE, shocked to learn wives of noblemen or very beautiful women were not embalmed until the 3rd or 4th day. This was to prevent embalmers from dishonoring them. Court records prove it happened. A case from the 19th dynasty describes an embalmer named Penab accused of violating Lady Tauret before the waiting period ended. His punishment? The harshest penalty, he was mummified alive. The message was clear, harm the dead and face death yourself. Egyptians also knew the science behind it. In hot weather, after 3 days the body decomposed enough to prevent abuse. Families often hired guards for protection during this time. Art and contracts show this system clearly. If embalmers took bodies too soon, contracts became void and legal action followed. Religiously, violation risked trapping the soul, stopping it from reaching the afterlife. Spells in the Book of the Dead cursed anyone who would harm the body. Tomb walls warned violators of eternal destruction. But after proper mummification, the body was safe and sacred. The danger was only in the in-between state. This shows it wasn't just morality, it was ritual purity. Bodies were in a liminal phase, no longer alive, not yet prepared. Contact during this time was cosmically dangerous. Because of this, embalmers lived isolated from society. They were well paid but avoided socially. Records even show families refusing to marry their daughters to embalmers. Despite their essential work, they were treated like an untouchable group, reflecting society's deep respect and fear of the dead. The stigma was so strong that embalmers often worked only in family businesses, unable to find other jobs despite their valuable skills. Even transporting bodies followed strict rules. Female remains were wrapped with extra layers and carried in closed containers, while male bodies could be moved openly. Guard records from the valleys of the kings and queens show special patrols during the waiting period when bodies were at risk. One papyrus describes guards catching grave robbers who came too early, seeking not treasure, but vulnerable remains. The 3-day rule created unexpected social effects. It became a status symbol to be embalmed immediately, showing either royal blood or absolute trust in the embalmer. Cleopatra famously demanded instant mummification, declaring, "My beauty shall not wait for time." Skipping the waiting period became another mark of elite privilege. While most Egyptians followed tradition, we today worry about flowers and funeral costs. Ancient Egyptians worried about protecting loved ones before embalming. It's a disturbing reminder that even the most open society in history had limits. But the taboo made sense once you realize vitality and regeneration were woven into every part of their culture, even their architecture. And when you discover what obelisks really meant, you'll never see a museum the same way again. Jube walked past them, seen them in films, maybe even touched one on vacation. But did you know every obelisk symbolized divine creative power? And those temple doors Jube stepped through? Congratulations, Jube symbolically experienced rebirth. The Egyptians didn't just practice sacred regeneration. They built it into every monument, every design, every structure. The Washington Monument? It's modeled on Egypt's symbol of creation. The Paris Obelisk in Place de la Concorde? Same story. These bit into conspiracy theories or modern guesses. Egyptians were crystal clear about their meaning. Obelisks were beams of divine power rising to the sky, channeling energy between earth and heaven. Temple entrances were gateways of life, where passing through meant spiritual rebirth. Even the annual Nile flood was seen as a divine act fertilizing the land. Let's begin with obelisks. The Egyptian word for obelisk was tijan, literally protection or defense. These were not vague metaphors. Inscriptions describe them as symbols of Ra's power piercing the heavens. The capstone, or pyramidaan, represented the first sunlight. The shaft stood for divine strength. When sunlight hit the golden tip each morning, it symbolized cosmic creation, light entering the world. But placement mattered too. Obelisks were erected in pairs at temple gates, representing duality and balance. The doorway between them symbolized the passage of life. Walking between obelisks meant transformation and rebirth. The Karnak temple has multiple sets, creating a symbolic journey of repeated rebirths leading to the inner sanctuary. Inscriptions prove the meaning. The Lateran obelisk in Rome states, "The golden light of Ra flows from my peak at dawn, bringing life to Egypt." The Luxor obelisk declares, "I stand eternal, the creative power of Adam made stone." These are not interpretations, they are direct translations. Temple doors were equally symbolic. The pylon entrance represented the horizon at sunrise. The sloping walls were the mountains of dawn, the horizontal beam was the sky. Passing through meant symbolically following the sun from night into day, from death into life. In Side, temples narrowed toward the sacred center, mirroring a spiritual journey where only priests could reach the heart of creation. Today's cities are full of Egyptian architecture, though few recognize it. The Vatican holds 13 Egyptian obelisks, the largest collection outside Egypt, symbols of divine power decorating the heart of Catholicism. London's Cleopatra's Needle, New York's Central Park Obelisk, Paris' Place de la Concorde, all ancient monuments to regeneration now treated as photo spots. Millions take selfies each year with 3,000-year-old symbols of creation. But obelisks were just the start. Temple columns were designed as bundled papyrus plants, symbols of growth and renewal. Their tops often showed lotus or papyrus blossoms opening, signs of rebirth. A hypostyle hall like Karnak's, with 134 massive columns, was a forest of symbolic life. Ibn pyramids embodied regeneration. They represented the first mound rising from primordial waters. Inseated passages symbolized the soul's path of change. The burial chamber was the womb of rebirth. Inseated pyramids were blueprints of creation carved in stone. Recent discoveries keep proving this. In 2020, radar scans at Saqqara revealed temple foundations shaped to represent creation concepts. Underground chambers formed symbolic patterns invisible above ground, requiring huge engineering efforts for purely spiritual meaning. Egyptians even built sound into temples. Acoustic studies show chambers amplified specific frequencies, enhancing chants of joy and ritual. Priests' voices were transformed by design. The temples literally resonated with vitality. Water features also carried meaning. Sacred Lake symbolized the primeval waters of creation. Priests bathed before ceremonies, returning symbolically to the moment life began. Drainage systems were tuned to mimic flowing water sounds. Even daily temple rituals, awakening the god statue, were ceremonies of renewal. Temple orientations followed cosmic principles. Most faced east-west to let the sunrise light the sanctuary, while others faced the Nile so flood symbolically blessed the holy space. At Asna, temple channels directed floodwater straight into the sanctuary, making the rebirth's gift part of worship. This symbolism extended beyond temples. Palaces echoed the same principles. The throne room often had twin obelisks and a doorway behind the king's seat, placing the pharaoh at the center of divine power. Royal chambers used sacred ratios from texts. Even common homes had doorways built with symbolic curves so every Egyptian experienced ritual passage daily. Millions admire these structures today without knowing what they meant. We live among their symbols but miss the point. Egyptians saw creation and regeneration as the forces holding the universe together. And this leads to a bigger question: how did history's most life-affirming civilization shape our world? The answer may surprise you. Remember when I said you'd never see an obelisk the same way? Now you know, they are 3,000-year-old monuments to divine creation. Weebay explored a culture where gods created life through self-generation, pharaohs married siblings as duty, people used crocodile dung for birth control, and mummies were prepared for eternal vitality. Egyptians didn't they hide human nature, they built their entire society on it. Every temple, festival, and ritual celebrated the forces of life. What we whisper, they carved into stone. What we bury in shame, they raised into monuments. And somehow, this openness lasted longer than any other civilization. Think of what Weebay uncovered, a creation myth of self-generation shaping 3,000 years of culture, fertility gods paraded in festivals wilder than Mardi Gras, royal siblings marrying until family trees circled back, women using contraceptives while enjoying freedoms lost for millennia, tombs filled with symbolic items for eternal strength, a 3-day embalming delay to protect bodies, an architecture that celebrated life at every scale. These show something about human nature, our taboos aren't timeless. They are recent inventions. Egyptians proved a society could be open, give women freedom, celebrate vitality, and still thrive for 3,000 years. They lasted millennia with creation at the center. Meanwhile, we struggle with basic health education. Maybe the question isn't why they were different, but why we became restrictive. They saw creation as sacred, we often see it as shameful. They built fertility into monuments, we hide it from schools. Their influence surrounds us, though we forget. Those obelisks in Rome, Paris, London, New York, they aren't just stolen artifacts. They are monuments to regeneration, stripped of meaning. The medical staff with called snakes. That symbol traces back to Egyptian healing and renewal. Ibn chemistry comes from Kemet, the Egyptian name for their land, where science and spirituality blended. We inherited their symbols but lost their truths. At least today we don't need crocodile dung for birth control. And thankfully, marriages no longer mean wedding your sibling. Dating apps may frustrate us, but imagine if your only choice was your brother or sister. Next time you complain about relationships, remember ancient Egypt, where romance meant family ties and preparing contraceptives for eternity. Egyptians knew something we've forgotten: life, creation, and renewal are the universe's driving forces. They took it to extremes that shock us, but their civilization thrived longer than any other. They built wonders still admired, developed medicine still useful, and created art still treasured, all while celebrating what we hide. The lesson isn't that they were strange, it's that we've grown too restrictive. Next time you see an obelisk, you'll know what it truly means. Next time you walk through a museum, you'll understand why Victorian archaeologists censored evidence. Next time someone complains about modern values, tell them of a society whose openness makes us look conservative. Egypt proved openness doesn't destroy a society, it can sustain it for 3,000 years. If this amazed you, subscribe. We're just beginning to explore history's most extraordinary practices. Comment which Egyptian custom shocked you most. And remember, every time you see an obelisk, you now know exactly what you're looking at. Share this with someone who thinks they know ancient history. Let's see if they can handle the truth about the world's most fascinating civilization. The stigma was so strong that embalmers often worked only in family businesses, unable to find other jobs despite their valuable skills. Even the transport of bodies followed strict rules. Female remains were wrapped in extra layers and moved in closed containers, while male bodies could be carried openly. Guard records from the valleys of the kings and queens show special patrols during the waiting period when bodies were most at risk. One papyrus even describes guards catching robbers who came too early, not for treasure, but for the unprotected remains. The 3-day rule brought unexpected social meaning. Being embalmed immediately became a status symbol, showing either royal blood or total trust in the embalmer. Cleopatra herself ordered immediate mummification, declaring, "My beauty shall not wait for time." Skipping the waiting period turned into another marker of elite privilege. While most people followed the tradition, our modern funerals worry about flowers and cost. Ancient Egyptians worried about protecting loved ones from violation before embalming. It is a disturbing reminder that even in the most open society, some limits could not be crossed. This taboo makes sense once you realize how vitality and renewal shaped every part of their world, even their architecture. And once you understand what obelisks truly symbolized, you'll never see them the same way again. Jube walked past them in museums, seen them in films, maybe even touched one on vacation. But did you know every obelisk symbolized divine creative energy? And when you stepped through temple doorways, you were symbolically reborn. Egyptians didn't they just practice sacred renewal, they built it into every structure, monument, and design. The Washington Monument? Based on an Egyptian symbol of creation, just like the obelisk in Paris. Despite modern guesses, the Egyptians were clear about their meaning. Obelisks represented divine power reaching to the heavens, channeling life between earth and sky. Temple gateways symbolized life's passage, with entry meaning rebirth. Even the annual Nile flood was seen as divine blessing renewing the land. Let's begin with the obelisks. The Egyptian word for obelisk was tijan, meaning protection or defense. Inscriptions state clearly that obelisks symbolized Ra's creative power piercing heaven. The capstone, or pyramidon, represented the first ray of sunlight. The shaft symbolized divine strength. At dawn, when sunlight struck the golden tip, it marked the moment of creation, bringing light to the world. Sunrise itself was cosmic renewal. And it is what guides rarely tell you, placement was symbolic too. Obelisks were raised in pairs before temples, symbolizing balance. The temple doorway between them represented life's passage. Walking between them meant ritual transformation. Karnak Temple has multiple pairs of obelisks and gates, creating a sequence of rebirths before reaching the sanctuary. The evidence is carved in stone. The Lateran obelisk in Rome reads, "The golden light of Are flows from my peak at dawn, bringing life to Egypt." Anoterat Luxor declares, "I stand eternal." The creative power of Adam made stone. These are direct translations, not modern ideas. The Egyptians wanted all to know their purpose. Temple gateways carried equal meaning. The standard pylon was shaped like the horizon, the sloped walls as mountains, the lintel as sky. Passing through symbolized traveling with the sun, from night to day, from death to rebirth. Inner temple passages narrowed, leading toward the holiest chamber, where only priests enter. Modern cities are filled with this symbolism, though unnoticed. The Vatican holds the most Egyptian obelisks outside Egypt, 13 monuments to creation in the heart of Catholicism. London's Cleopatra's Needle, New York's Central Park Obelisk, Paris' Place de la Concorde, these are all ancient monuments to regeneration, now selfie spots. Kalims in temples represented bundled papyrus, symbols of new life. Their tops often showed lotus or papyrus blossoms, symbols of rebirth. Halls like Karnak's hypostyle with 134 columns created a forest of renewal within sacred space. Even pyramids carried the theme. Their shape represented the primeval mound rising from chaos waters, the first land of creation. Passages symbolized transformation, the burial chamber the womb of rebirth. Each pyramid was an architectural diagram of creation. New discoveries confirm this. In 2020, radar scans at Saqqara revealed foundations shaped into symbols of life and creation, forms hidden underground requiring massive effort. Egyptians even designed sound into temples. Recent studies show chambers amplified specific frequencies tied to joy and celebration. Priests' voices during rituals were transformed by the structure, making the temple resonate with vitality. Water features also held meaning. Sacred Lake symbolized the waters of creation, where priests bathed before rituals to return symbolically to the first moment of life. Drainage systems were shaped to create flowing water sounds. Twice daily rituals involved awakening the goat statue, renewing divine life each day. Temple orientation followed this symbolism. Most faced east-west so the sunrise entered the sanctuary, bringing divine light. Others faced the Nile, linking the annual flood with temple blessings. At Desna, channels were carved to bring floodwaters into the sanctuary itself. The symbolism wasn't only for temples. Palaces used the same codes. Thrones were placed between twin obelisks with doorways behind, positioning the king at the heart of divine power. Royal chambers were built with sacred ratios. Even ordinary houses had symbolic doorway curves, ensuring that Egyptians experienced ritual passages daily. Today, millions photograph these monuments without knowing their meaning. We live surrounded by Egyptian symbolism yet blind to it. Egyptians saw creation and regeneration not as private matters but as the powers sustaining the universe. Which brings us to the ultimate question: how did the most life-affirming civilization shape our world? The answer is surprising. Remember I said you'd never see an obelisk the same way again? Now you know, you're looking at a 3,000-year-old monument to divine creation. We've seen a world where gods created themselves, where pharaohs married sisters as duty, where crocodile dung was birth control, where mummies were prepared for eternal vitality. Egyptians didn't deny human nature, they built their civilization on it. Every temple, every festival, every ritual honored the life force that kept balance. What we hide, they carved in stone. What we whisper, they proclaimed on pyramid tops. And this openness lasted 3,000 years, longer than any other civilization. Think about what we uncovered: a creation story of self-generation shaping millennia, fertility gods celebrated in public, royal families marrying within, women enjoying contraceptive freedom, the dead buried with guides to eternal vitality, bodies protected by delay before embalming, architecture as one grand hymn to life and rebirth. What does this say about us? That our taboos are not natural, but modern inventions. Egyptians proved that society could be open, honor life, give women reproductive freedom, and still build wonders. They lasted 3,000 years with divine creation at their core. We struggle with basic health lessons. Maybe the question isn't why they were so open, but why we became restrictive. They saw creation as sacred, we see it as secret. They built monuments to fertility, we build walls around discussion. Their influence echoes in our world in ways we forget. Those obelisks in Rome, Paris, London, and New York, they are not just stolen stones, but living symbols of renewal we've stripped of meaning. Even the medical staff with cold snakes comes from Egyptian healing symbols. The word chemistry itself comes from Kemet, their name for Egypt, where science and nature were one. We inherited their symbols while forgetting their truths. At least we don't need crocodile dung for birth control anymore, and we don't marry siblings. That thing may be messy, but it beats competing with your brother for your sister's hand. Super right problems seem small compared to preparing contraceptives for eternity. Egyptians knew what we've lost, that life, creation, and renewal are the universe's core forces. They took this belief to shocking extremes, yet built a civilization that thrived for millennia. They left monuments that inspire awe, medicine still in use, art still treasured, all while embracing truths we often hide. Maybe they weren't this strange, we are simply too restrained. Next time you see an obelisk, you'll know its meaning. Next time you walk through a museum's Egyptian gallery, you'll understand why Victorians censored evidence. Next time someone criticizes modern values, you can remind them of a civilization whose openness made today's progress look conservative. Egyptians proved openness didn't cause collapse, it built the longest-lasting civilization in history.